Hi, I'm Dax Ginn, the studio director at Whatboy Games, and today I'd like to talk about passion and happiness in the games industry and how those emotions have the potential to unite us as developers and as colleagues. And I also want to extend that idea to talk about company culture and building a studio. Now, the thing that I've always assumed that united games developers was their passion for playing and creating games. Every studio prides itself on being comprised of extraordinarily passionate and creative individuals. But I've got a bit of a problem with this. And the problem is that I don't think that professional passion makes happy people. I think you can feel pride in your professional achievements, but having worked on games from failed indie startups all the way through to massive AAA successes and franchises, my experience is that passion for your work only gets you so far down the road to happiness. What we've seen from a lot of big development studios over the last decade or so is a drive to really improve the quality of work life within the studio, within the team, by offering developers free meals, breakfast, lunch and dinner, free soft drinks, Ubers home if you're working late, table tennis tables, all done under the guise of making happy employees. But in reality, all these things do is just encourage employees and developers to stay longer at the studio and to work longer hours on their projects. I think that for too long the games industry has implicitly promised developers, particularly young developers, that the passion for the hard work and creativity that games development requires will be rewarded with a deep sense of satisfaction and happiness once they ship that game and they play it for the first time and they see their name in the credits. And I just don't think that this is the case. So I'd like to talk today about my relationship with passion and how I believe that as an industry we have taken advantage of the passion of games developers with the promise of happiness. But since the disruption of COVID and now and the fact that we work generally in a exclusively digital realm, as an industry we have an opportunity to create not just great games from within our studios, but also to turn talented developers into excellent people outside of the studio. Excellent people who take pride in their professional successes, but who also find genuine happiness in their private lives, because I believe that genuine happiness is only possible when we achieve personal goals that are important to us privately. So, I want to take you back to my first encounter with passion, which sounds a lot more romantic than what it actually was. I grew up in Australia and I studied law at university, and I graduated from law school in 1997. And I moved to the UK, to London, to start work as a lawyer. And I had a job at a law firm on Fleet Street in central London, and I was living in a flat above a pub in Camden. And I was travelling into Fleet Street every day, and for the first 6 months or so of my career, I hated it. I absolutely despised the job that I was doing, and I just spent 5 years studying for that, and was just filled with this sense of dread that I'm now on a career path doing a job that I absolutely, utterly hate. And I would come back to this flat above this pub every evening. There was a bunch of other Aussie guys and 2 insane Welshmen that I lived with. And we would meet in the pub at the end of every day. We would drink until final orders, and then we'd go upstairs and play computer games. And that was my life, rinse and repeat. And the drinking and the gaming was great, but my job was just awful. And so I felt really, really stuck, and I knew that I was really desperately unhappy. And so I had one of those conversations in the morning and looking at myself in the mirror and asked myself that question. Like, what do you want, Dax? What do you want? And the guy in the mirror said to me, well, I just want to be happy. And so I said, okay, well, what do you think you need to be happy? And he said, well, I think I need to be successful at whatever I do. All right, that makes sense. What do you need to be successful? Well, I think I need to be really good. I need to be good at what I do. Okay, well, how do you get good at something? Well, I think I need to be passionate. I need to find a career path that I'm passionate about. So I sort of created this model in my mind of whatever I do needs to start with passion, that then leads to developing skills, that then leads to success, and that then leads to happiness. So that's the model in which I built my career. And the guy in the mirror said to me, well, sit down and write down the things that you're passionate about. So I made a list, and the first one was I'm passionate about playing guitar. The second thing, I'm passionate about playing computer games. So I had sort of put that out to the universe and committed to myself to structure my career around things that I'm passionate about. And then a week later, I was sitting in that pub on a Wednesday night, and it was absolutely rammed, which was really weird because no one ever went there on a Wednesday night. And I had a beer, and I was walking around looking for somewhere to sit, and there was just nowhere. The place was absolutely chockers. And I finally saw an empty seat. So I sat down in this seat, and a guy came up to me and said, "You're in my chair." And I said something smart-ass like, "It's not your chair, it belongs to the pub." And then some Marxist quote about all property being theft or something. And he punched me. And we got into this really embarrassing fight. I've never been in a fight in my life, and I think nor had he. And I think when we started this fight, we both assumed that we'd be about 5,000% more effective at fighting than we actually were. Because it was awful. It was awful for both of us. And so to sort of put an end to this embarrassing spectacle, I offered to buy him a drink, and we sat at the bar, and he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a lawyer and I hate my life." And I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm a games designer." And that just completely blew my mind because the Australian games industry didn't exist at all at that time. And so I grew up loving games and playing games and being passionate about games, but I always assumed they sort of magically appeared in Tokyo and San Francisco. I didn't actually think that people make these things and that's a career that you can pursue. And the reason why it was so crowded is because 3 blocks away was Sony Signosis offices in Camden, and they were having a drinks thing at that pub. It was called the Camden Brewing Company that night. And so everyone there were game developers. And so this guy said to me, "Look, we're always looking for testers. Why don't you come to the studio tomorrow? We'll have a chat, and if you look like a good fit, you can become a games tester." So I finished my beer, I went upstairs to my crappy room, and I called my mum in Australia and I said, "Mum, I'm not going to be a lawyer." And she started crying, and she said to me, "Well, what are you going to be?" And I said, "I'm going to be a games tester." And she got really angry with me. But I went to the interview, I got the job, I quit my job at the law firm the next day, and then a week later, I was a QA tester. And that was the beginning of my career, and gee, was I passionate about it. I absolutely loved it. And so now I'm going to fast forward the next 10 years of my career really, really quickly because it all sort of fits into one chunk. From Signosis, I joined a startup company in Oxford called Virtual State Productions that got acquired by Traveller's Tales, and I became lead designer on a Crash Bandicoot game that we did there. And I went to Argonaut in Edgeware, and I was lead designer on a game called iNinja that we did for PlayStation 2. And then Argonaut went into administration, and a chunk of people from Argonaut went off to form Rocksteady. And those guys, Jamie Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker, said to me, "Why don't you come with us?" And I was like, "Startup indie studio? No way. You guys are going to crash and burn. That's a terrible idea." But I was really interested in the business of the business. How do games make money? Because I'd only ever worked on the development side, and I always had this very antagonistic relationship with publishers. So I joined SCI, who were a publisher, who then acquired Eidos. So I was sort of working as a publishing side designer on Tomb Raider and on Just Cause 1 and 2 and really fantastic titles. But all the way through that kind of 10-year chunk, what I knew was to develop those skills that my passion was driving me to learn, just took incredible amounts of sacrifice, personal sacrifice. Crunch culture was just standard. Late nights and weekends were just what everybody did. And I remember sleeping under my desk at some point in every single one of those projects. So, I was working hard and I was developing skills, but I didn't at any time feel like I was achieving success. And that sort of made me think, well, of course I'm not happy. I'm working hard, I'm killing myself, I'm making huge personal sacrifices, but I'm not seeing success, and therefore I still haven't found that happiness that I was searching for. One of the games I was working on at Eidos was Batman Arkham Asylum. So when that game came out, and it was a massive success, Warner Brothers acquired Rocksteady, and then those 2 guys called me up again and said, "We're going to give you a second chance. Do you want to come and work at Rocksteady and head up marketing and PR and community?" And this time I said yes. So between 2009 and 2016, I headed up marketing and community for all of the Batman Arkham franchise. And that was nothing but uninterrupted success. In terms of the vision that I had in my mind as a kid, walking the red carpet and lifting the trophy and making the speech, and it was that for years and years and years. because those games were so insanely good and so insanely successful. So the experience that I had at Rocksteady surely was the thing that was going to lead to my happiness. Making presentations at the Sony press conference and Game of the Year at E3 and those sorts of things. They're exactly the stuff that you dream of. And I felt that this was the launch pad to feeling, that genuine sense of deep satisfaction and enduring happiness. But it never felt like the kind of happiness that I imagined was due to me when I was a kid just starting out. So something was broken in my model. Passion leads to skill, skill leads to success, but it runs out of steam before it gets to genuine happiness. I think the greatest thing that happened to me in those years at Rocksteady was meeting a guy named Adam Doherty. And he and I are now the co-founders of Whatboy Studios, and that's our company. He was the lead gameplay coder on all of the Arkham games and was sort of the epicenter of everything that happened on that team. So I left Rocksteady after Arkham VR, beginning of 2017. I was in San Francisco at GDC in, when is that? March that year, and I had heard that Adam was leaving Rocksteady. And it was like hearing that Elon Musk is leaving Tesla. It just seems unthinkable that someone who is so central to everything is going to leave. So I flew back to London and I called him and I said, I'm going to come up to your house in Sutton. We need to talk. So I went up to Sutton and we went to a pub near his house. It seems like every big career decision I've made happened in a pub. And we drank about 5 pints of beer and we just caught up. We didn't talk about anything. We just talked and caught up. And then I said to him, like, a guy of your talent, he's an exceptional designer, an exceptional coder, what do you want to do? And he said, I just want to make small, simple, really good quality strategy games. And I was like, dude, I think we should start a studio together. And he said, okay, that sounds good. And he said, I want to call it Whatboy. And the URL was available, I bought it, and that was the conversation. That's how we started our team. The conversation that happened after that was the fascinating bit, though, because we then talked into the night about the things that we have in common. And Adam and I could not be more different. He's a designer and a coder extraordinaire. I cannot do either of those things, even though I was a designer for a long time. I wasn't a terribly good one. But marketing and PR, community, business development, law, those are the things that I know I do well. But the common ground that we have is that we both lived through extraordinary personal sacrifice in building the Arkham franchise together. We both, were there on weekends, late at nights, and we knew what it cost everybody on that team to really deliver those extraordinary games. The other piece of common ground that we have is that we both have children who have additional needs. Adam's story is his story, so I'm not going to speak to that, but my son has quadriplegic cerebral palsy. He's 8 years old. And so the thing that bonds us together is this understanding of how incredibly demanding it is to have a child who has additional needs. And so when we started Whatboy and we talked about what sort of culture do we want to build at this studio, it was entirely selfish because the way we wanted to work was flexibly. We didn't want to find ourselves in a situation where we are having to make a choice between making a great game and being a great father. We wanted to work in a culture where when one of us has to go to hospital with our son, it happens like that. You just got to go. And so and that's only happened on a couple of occasions, but when it does happen, I will call him or he'll call me and just say, I got to go. And off you go. And whoever is the guy left behind just runs the company until the other comes back. Just no questions asked. And so that sense of flexibility in how we work so that we can be great parents is the core of our culture. But that was just the two of us. We made our first game in 2019 in early access, and we released it at 1.0 in 2021, a strategy game called Trials of Fire, out on Steam. It did well enough that we can now create a second game. So we're now a studio of 10 people. We're working on our second game. We have a publishing deal. It's great. But the question for us is, how do we scale this intensely personal and selfish motivation so that it applies to other people? And it didn't take long for us to realize that everybody's got their own stuff going on. Having a child with additional needs is really demanding, but that's not exclusive to us. Everybody has got some pressure in their life which really demands a lot of their time, a lot of their personal time, a lot of their private energy. And so as we scaled the studio and brought more people in, the promise culturally that we make to them is whatever personal passions and private ambitions that you have, whether they're challenging or whether they're really positive things like pursuing a hobby or an ambition that you really believe in. As a studio, we are here to make the time, the space, and to give you the support to pursue those things. Because as incredible as it is to get a BAFTA nomination, nothing comes close to being a great father when it comes to genuine happiness. And so we've built a company culture in which everybody knows that they can rely on us as a studio to have the time, the space, and the support to do the things that are important to them in their private lives. Our art director, for example, is married but doesn't have any children, and he has been going through the process over the last year of becoming a foster parent. The amount of vetting and documentation and interviews required to become a foster parent is extraordinary. And anytime he needs time off, mate, off you go, let us know when you're back, no questions asked. And he is going to be a phenomenal foster father. And that's what I mean by making excellent people outside of the studio. The contribution that he will make to the lives of kids who desperately need someone like him is just incredible. One of our illustrators is an insane gym enthusiast. You know, he doesn't have kids, he's not married, so it's a completely different dynamic. But for him, going to the gym is a ritual. That's the thing that keeps him sane. If he was not able to go until after 6:30 when he's finished the workday, the gym's packed and it's horrible. So he goes between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we just work around that because we're not focused on the hours that he's working, we're focused on the outcomes of his work. And that makes all the difference to him. And I asked him this afternoon, I said, look, do you mind if I talk about you going to the gym in this thing that I'm doing tonight? And he was like, mate, you don't understand, it is such a blessing. And it doesn't sound like much, but it means the world to him. So parenting is hard, and parenting a child with additional needs is really hard. But there's no shortcuts, and it requires time so that it requires time to do these really important things. But so does starting an exciting new relationship or investing in an existing one, pursuing a hobby or an ambition, taking care of aging parents, or resolving a difficult domestic situation or overcoming a personal challenge that might be a cause of anxiety in your life. At Whatboy, our culture is to ensure that we provide the time and space and support so that people can achieve personal objectives in their lives, whatever they may be, no questions asked. So I'm just going to finish with this. I think we've come a long way as an industry from a place where crunch and sleeping under your desk was commonplace, now to a place where there's a huge amount of focus on what a studio needs to offer in order to attract talented developers. Unfortunately, the answer to that all too often is free pizza. And they're great perks, but I don't think they even come close to making people genuinely happy. I think as an industry, we're uniquely capable of creating for our colleagues an environment where the focus is on outcomes and not hours worked, particularly in this post-COVID world of remote development of a digital title. Finally, a metaphor for the way that we think about ourselves at Whatboy is to imagine yourself as a riverbed. You don't have to close your eyes for this or anything, but it's kind of a Zen vision. Imagine yourself as a riverbed, and on that riverbed are large, immovable rocks. And those things are your personal passions. For me, they're my kids, my health, my guitars. And my work is the river that flows around them, in close proximity, but never dislodging them, because the work will always come and go, but the personal promises that I've made to myself to be a great father should never be sacrificed to the river. We need to give our colleagues the time and the space and the support to find success in the achievement of their personal goals, whatever they may be, no questions asked. Because this is the only way, in my opinion, the only surefire way to transform passion into genuine happiness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, that was amazing. We do a survey of the games industry every year and ask how they got into the industry. We're going to have to add I had a fight with someone in the games industry.
The number of times I've been asked that, and I always say, don't ask me that question, because it's a terrible story.
And you said pizza doesn't bring you happiness. We've got some pizza shortly, so we'll see if people are made happy by that. I just wonder whether working in London and now living and working in Brighton, has that made a difference at all? I'm from Brighton, so I'm going to be biased, and I work in London. It's a
To my
shithole,
happiness?
So yeah, to your happiness. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I did that commute from Brighton to Kentish Town every day for 10 years. And it was 3 hours up, 3 hours back. So because I was working with the US so much, actually being on a train late at night meant that I could just continue to work, which is just stupid. And that's my point, the personal sacrifice that went into AAA development or any development. It is such a demanding career that we have all chosen. And my experience is you can give everything and you can find success, but the chances of finding happiness, I think it's the wrong path to be on if that's what you're looking for.
Amazing, thank you. Any burning questions for Dax, and then we'll squeeze one question
Hi.
if that's all right.
Hi, thank you so much for that. I just wondered if I could ask you a personal reflection on the state of things at the moment. So we've got recent news from Microsoft, Unity, and there's been layoffs elsewhere, Amazon. Are we at a turning point? Are we looking to possibly step back in terms of the number of people who are employed and opportunities when crunch and things have come into the spotlight?
Yeah.
Massively media during Red Dead Redemption 2 development, and also now post-COVID, people asking more working at home. Are we at a precipice, or is it that some in the industry are going to go one way and sort of passion projects are going to go into a different direction?
I think the indie space is a great space to be in because you can be so flexible and so agile and set your own sort of style of working. Talking to colleagues who work in massive studios, trying to navigate that post-COVID return to work issue is really problematic, because I don't think you can just say to people, okay, we're all back in the office now. I think it can't be top down. It has to be a bottom up thing. You have to say, well, what is your preference for working, and how can we structure our organisation in a way that just focuses on the outcomes that you deliver, rather than you being in a particular place at a particular time, which is the way it's always been done. I think the emergence of unionisation in bigger organisations is a really fascinating development as well. That was unthinkable 10 years ago. But to answer your question, I've always thought that these enormous teams, like the teams that make an Assassin's Creed game of 1,000 people over 6 studios, always seemed really unsustainable to me, and always must have been filled with really, really unhappy people. And particularly the CD Projekt Red guys who worked on Cyberpunk. Like when those reviews came out, my heart just broke for them. They put 8 years into that game, and the QA team would have known the state of that game, but nobody listened to them. And I think that's really heartbreaking. So despite thinking I'm here for the passion and I'm here for, to make something truly brilliant, I don't think any of them would have come out of that experience thinking, yes, that's what I'm looking for in the games industry. So I much prefer being an indie developer now in a team of 10 rather than working in a team of 250 for any day of the week.
Wonderful, thanks very much.
Cool.